Quebec's next election is not even a year away. And for the nearly 50-year-old Parti Québécois, it will be a test of its relevance. Support for the PQ is at a historic low compared to its heydays of the 1990s, but its bold sovereigntist vision still resonates in the province, even outside of it. An Anglophone from Nova Scotia is so drawn to the cause that she is vying for the PQ nomination in a Montreal riding. Why is she taking up the separatist fight? And how did she expect to find success? And joining me now from Montreal is Jennifer Drouin, the Parti Québécois board member and candidate for the PQ nomination in the riding of Sainte-Marie-Saint-Jacques. Jennifer, here's a question I never thought I would ask. How does an Anglophone from Nova Scotia become a separatist in Quebec?
Well, that happened pretty easily, actually. It started on referendum night in '95. Watching the faces of the people on the yes side as the night went on, and then I came to Quebec a year later, and that kind of solidified it.
But you know,
it's kind of like we're not in Kansas anymore. We're not in English Canada anymore.
I think a lot of other Canadians were looking at faces of those who were, by the thinnest of margins, of course, but victorious, the no side. What was it that appealed to you from those who saw it from the other perspective?
Like, you know, when you watch a football game and you're kind of like rooting for your own team, but you're also kind of like feeling a little bad for the other side?
Yeah.
And the underdog? It was kind of like that, right? Because I grew up as an English Canadian in Nova Scotia. I'd watched the pre-referendum coverage. I, had a very English Canadian perspective. I was on the no side. But as the night kind of wore on, it was the yes was winning, and as the night went on, the yes started to decline and the no started to win. And instead of feeling kind of happy for my team, I started to see the faces on the other side and to see their sadness and their kind of loss of hope, and to realize that I had grown up my entire life with this kind of federalist no side, but not really knowing what the arguments were, and then seeing the emotion on the other side was like kind of a wake-up call that maybe there are arguments on the other side and maybe they're valid and these people really believe in this. And then it was a kind of process of discovering what all those arguments were. Okay,
so walk me through that. You've been involved with the Parti Québécois for 20 years in some way, shape, or form now. What is it about the call? What is it about separatism, sovereignty in particular, that seems right to you?
Well, basically all of the arguments that a Francophone would have for sovereignty hold just as well for an Anglophone. So in my case, it started with the economic arguments, not only that it wouldn't be a financial catastrophe, but that it would be beneficial. And then after that, learning more about the culture and the history of Quebec, learning the French language obviously was a really important step and helped a lot to kind of understand where Quebecers were coming from. And I mean, nowadays, like I said, I've been in the party. I got my card in '95 when I was still even living in Nova Scotia. And now the argument is, it evolves over time, but there are always still good reasons. You
ultimately think that Quebec would be better off, and not just Francophone Quebecers, that Anglo Quebecers would also be better off. I mean, walk me through that. Why does it have to be a sovereign state for that to happen?
Well, if we start with the economic arguments, Quebec sends 50 billion, billion. There's million and milliard in French, billion a year to Ottawa in taxes. And whether you're an Anglophone or a Francophone and you check English or French on your tax return, it doesn't change how much you get back. So every reason that has to do with the money that Quebec puts into Ottawa and, doesn't have a choice in how to invest it in things like healthcare or education. Instead, we're contributing to the Alberta oil sands or to the Ontario automotive industry.
I mean, what about the sizable amounts of federal money, federal loans have gone into the aerospace industry?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you remember a while back, there's been several times that we've done a year one budget, and Quebec comes out on top, even if you take into account transfer payments and all of those things, that we would gain $4 billion a year in the first year alone after sovereignty. So, those things, they apply to English Quebecers too. The
election is about a year away. You would like to be a candidate for the PQ. Your name is in that hat right now. Mm-hmm. Why do you think now is the time, given that polls in recent months seem to show Quebecers believe the independence question is settled, it's done?
Oh, I don't think it's settled or done. It won't be done until independence actually happens. It will never be off the table. And if you look at polls over, the 20 years since or 22 years since the last referendum, it tends to be in the 35 to 40% at any given point when there's not even a referendum campaign happening. So you add a referendum campaign into there, and those numbers increase. If you go back to 2005 and the sponsorship scandal and the Gumry Commission, it went over the 50% mark at that point. So it's always an issue because it's unresolved.
Do you agree with your party's decision to not bring forward the question of independence if it wins in the next election?
So the party position is that we are not going to hold a referendum in the first mandate after the 2018 election, but we would in a second mandate after 2022. And I agree that it's a good strategy to essentially spend 4 years cleaning up the mess of Liberal government that's been in power pretty much nonstop since 2003 because of neoliberal austerity that's kind of decimated the social safety net, to get that back in place and at the same time spend 4 years talking very concretely about the benefits of independence so that people know going into 2022 what they'd be voting for and why it's still important today.
We've only got a few seconds left, but I got to ask you, when you were still living in Nova Scotia and you took out that PQ membership, what did other party members think about this Anglo from Nova Scotia signing up and joining the cause?
They were thrilled. I mean, why wouldn't they be?
Well, but it's
every party.
It is unusual.
Wants to recruit members.
Sure, but I mean, when you end up at meetings, do people not go, "Who's the Anglo in the corner"?
Not at all. I mean, like, one of the great things that I love about the PQ and Quebec in general is the warmth of the Québécois people, and the PQ, it holds true as well. And I'm not the first. I mean, you could go back to the Patriots in 1837. There were the Nelson brothers. David Payne was the PQ M&A for Vachon for 3 mandates. There was another Anglophone on the Conseil Exécutif National du PQ, the same as I am now, back in the 80s, named Henry Milner. So there's always been Anglophones in the Parti Québécois and in the sovereignty movement. It's just I formed a group called Anglophones for Quebec Independence to bring them all together to speak with a common voice. But we've always been here. And I think it is important because it shows how inclusive and open the sovereignty movement is, contrary to what's sometimes portrayed. It's very open and not at all in any way xenophobic.
Jennifer Drouin, we'll certainly be watching this race. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.